How does a modern nation collapse in under a week? What new form of warfare could so utterly shatter a country's defenses that its government would be forced to capitulate in a matter of days? In the spring of 1940, the Netherlands was confronted with this terrifying reality as a revolutionary German strategy unfolded with breathtaking speed and devastating consequences. The invasion, a critical component of the larger German offensive codenamed Fall Gelb, or Case Yellow, commenced on the 10th of May 1940, and in its wake, it would redefine the very nature of military conquest. The German plan was audacious, relying not on a slow, grinding advance, but on a sudden, paralyzing strike aimed directly at the heart of the Dutch nation. The core of this strategy was the unprecedented and massive use of air landing and airborne operations, a vertical assault that would bypass traditional front lines entirely. This was warfare in a new dimension. On the very first day of the attack, the skies over the Netherlands filled with the silhouettes of German transport planes, unleashing some of the earliest mass paratroop drops in history. These soldiers, descending from the clouds, were tasked with seizing the country's nerve centers, capturing tactical points deep within Dutch territory to cripple the defenders and clear a path for the main ground troops. Their targets were the vital arteries of the Dutch stronghold, an area known as Fortress Holland. The German Luftwaffe's paratroopers executed a two-pronged aerial assault designed for maximum disruption. One of the most ambitious objectives was the capture of several airfields in the vicinity of The Hague. This was not merely a tactical move, it was a decapitation strike aimed at capturing the Dutch government and the royal family, a bold attempt to end the war in a single stroke by seizing the nation's leadership. Simultaneously, a second wave of airborne forces targeted the crucial Moerdijk and Dordijk bridges, along with the Walhaven airfields near Rotterdam. By securing these key crossings and transport hubs, the Germans intended to create an air bridge that would allow their mechanized ground forces to pour into the country's core, effectively immobilizing the Dutch military and rendering its defensive lines obsolete before they could even be fully manned. Against this futuristic onslaught stood the Dutch Armed Forces, an institution tragically ill-prepared for the conflict that had arrived at its doorstep. The Dutch Army of 1940 was by its own standards considered unfit for battle, a relic of a bygone era. While the rise of the Hitler regime had spurred the Dutch to begin a process of rearmament, the effort was far slower and less comprehensive than that undertaken by its neighbors, France and Belgium. It was only in the year 1936 that the defense budget began to see gradual increases, but this was too little, too late. The army had not been considered adequate even at the conclusion of the First World War, and the interwar years had done little to improve its condition. The equipment of the average Dutch soldier told a story of neglect and obsolescence. Most of the infantry were armed with the Gewehr M95 rifle, a weapon that had been officially adopted in the year 1895, making it a design from the 19th century facing the most modern army of the 20th. The Dutch army possessed very little armor, leaving it with no effective counter to the German panzers. Its air arm, the Luftwaffeafdeling, was a mere shadow of the mighty Luftwaffe, possessing only a handful of reasonably modern aircraft to defend the nation's skies. The artillery corps was similarly antiquated, with a total of 676 howitzers and field guns, many of which were obsolete models incapable of matching the range and firepower of their German counterparts. This was an army poised to fight the last war, now facing the architects of the next one. Despite the overwhelming technological and strategic disadvantages, the Dutch forces did not simply collapse. In the opening hours of the invasion, they mounted fierce resistance and even achieved some remarkable, albeit temporary, successes. The most notable of these was the Battle for The Hague, where Dutch counterattacks successfully thwarted the German airborne forces' primary objective. On that first day, the Germans failed to capture the city, a significant tactical victory for the defenders that momentarily stalled the enemy's ambitious plan to seize the government. Elsewhere, as German armies advanced on the ground from the south, Dutch troops desperately tried to slow them by blowing up bridges, a classic defensive tactic that, while sometimes effective, could not ultimately halt the mechanized tide. On the Grebbeberg, a key sector of the Dutch defensive Grebbe line, soldiers held out against relentless German assaults for 3 grueling days before the line finally fell on the 13th of May. However, these acts of bravery could not alter the rapidly deteriorating strategic situation. The decisive blow, the one that would break the will of the Dutch High Command, came not from a tank or a rifle, but from the sky. On the 14th of May 1940, the Germans delivered a chilling ultimatum to the Dutch commander in the city of Rotterdam: surrender the garrison or the city would be annihilated by aerial bombing. While frantic negotiations were still underway, the roar of engines filled the air. Luftwaffe bombers appeared over Rotterdam and systematically unleashed their deadly payload, destroying much of the historic city center in a storm of fire and explosives. The attack left nearly 80,000 people homeless and served as a brutal demonstration of German power and ruthlessness. The bombing of Rotterdam was the final terrible act. With the city in ruins, the Germans immediately threatened to visit the same fate upon other Dutch cities, specifically naming Utrecht as the next target. the Dutch High Command faced an impossible choice. Their army was running critically low on supplies, and more importantly, it possessed no credible defense against the bombers that could now strike any city at will. To continue the fight would not lead to victory, but only to the further destruction of their country and the slaughter of their civilians. Recognizing that further resistance was futile, the Dutch leadership made the agonizing decision to yield. On the 15th of May 1940, General Winkelmann signed the capitulation agreement, formally surrendering the main Dutch forces. While pockets of Dutch troops in the province of Zeeland would bravely continue to resist for 2 more days, their fight ended on the 17th of May, at which point Germany completed its total occupation of the Netherlands. The battle had lasted just a handful of days, a swift and brutal campaign that signaled to a watching world the terrifying efficiency of a new German way of war.
Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts or next video ideas.